So before we get into adding a game over screen, let's first move back to actually creating a home screen. We kind of just jumped directly into the game so we could start creating some game mechanics, which I think is a lot more fun. But now that we're going to either win or lose a game, we're going to want to know how we actually start this game or where we can transition to once we've lost. So that's going to start back in a home screen. So what we want to do is we want to create a new scene. So far we've only been working in this one scene. So we'll click the home button here in the top left hand corner. And you can see that you have these tabs here, and one of the tabs is scenes. And if we click on that, you can see that we have this initial scene. And at this point you can leave it as the name initial scene, or you can just call this something like game. And you notice down here at the very bottom left we have this plus sign, so we can actually click on that and create a new scene, and we can just name this home. So that would be our home screen. And it doesn't really matter what order these are in, but just good practice is to make sure they're in the order in which someone might experience them, because we can set up rules that just say go to next scene, which would be this one, or we can say go to a specific scene, which in that case we don't need to worry about what order these are in. But it's good to have kind of home screens here, gameplay screens there, and then all your levels ordered in a specific order. So let's double click on the home scene. And just like the beginning of these tutorials, you can see that we're left with an empty stage here. We can switch between these scenes by clicking on this scene icon here. So now you can see we have home and game. So at any point, if we want to work on one, like going back to game, all I have to do is click on that. You can see we're back inside our game scene, or I can go back up here and then go back to home. Our actors and our inspector, this never changes, but as we change our scenes, you can see we get the different scene stages, and our home scene stage is completely blank. So we created a few graphics for this, so let's go ahead and bring those in. So we'll go back to images, click on the plus icon, and let's go back to our art folder. And this time we want to bring in the home screen graphic. So we'll bring that in. We're going to drag that up into our actors area, and then we can drag that into the stage and then just get that aligned. So you can see it looks very similar to our game here, except for we have a title and some static graphics. None of these are animated. We can actually just duplicate the rock and delete some of its intelligence and just drag those things in here if you want to populate this a little bit more, but this is just a simple graphic to work with. Let's bring in a few more graphics. So again, I'm going to click on that plus icon, and we're going to bring in the option and play button, and then we'll take both of these by clicking and dragging over both of them, and we'll drag them both up into our actors area here as well. And I'm going to drag play into our stage and options into our stage, and just get them lined up in the center here. So at this point we could set up some simple behaviors and simple rules that when we play or press this play button or this option button, something simple happens, like we move to the next scene. But I like to make games a little bit more polished and a little bit more exciting than that, even if we're working with static menus. Don't just put energy and time into developing great gameplay for your games, but remember that the menus themselves are part of the game experience. So adding animation or great sound effects to your menus, or just taking the time to make sure that your menus are as exciting as your game, is going to make sure that you actually do come out with a great game in the end. So what we want to do is actually animate this play and option button coming into the scene. And it's pretty simple to do this using the move to behavior. So what happens is when we press play right now and we preview the scene, this is how our game starts. We just simply have a very static image here and static play buttons. But we want these buttons to animate in. So the first thing I want to do is figure out where are these buttons actually located. So I've taken the time to place these exactly where I want, which is right here in the center of my screen. And now where these located is simple to locate or find by double clicking on the actor itself. And then inside this attributes area, you can click on the position, and you can see that we have an X and Y position here. 519 and 465. Don't worry about the decimal value. So you're going to want to write this down, the X and Y. So 519 by 465. So I'll just type in 519 by 465 in a notepad here, just in case I forget as I'm moving back and forth. And I'm going to do the same thing with the options button. I'm going to double click on that here inside the stage, not in the actors bin, because I'll just get 0, 0 coordinates for these guys. But I'll double click on options, and again go to position, and this one's at 512 by 313. So I'm going to go back to a notepad, and I'm just going to type in 512 by 313. So just remember, this is the play button, and this is the option button, and then the top is X and Y, X and Y. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take this, I'm going to click on the play button, hold down the shift key so I can click and drag this across perfectly horizontally, and just drag it off the stage. Same thing with the options. I'm going to click on that, hold down the shift key, and then click and drag so I can constrain it as I move it. And I actually don't move it in the Y, I'm just moving it over into the X. So we want to move these over. So now we want to jump into the play actor here inside the actors bin. So double click on play. We want to give this some program intelligence. So we'll go into our behaviors tab down here, and we want to drag in a timer. So I'm going to drag and drop a timer here. It's for our play actor. And I'm going to say after, let's say 1 second, I want something to happen. Well, what do I want to happen? Well, we want it to move into position. So we're going to scroll down to the move to behavior and drag that into the timer. See, make sure that you don't do this. Don't just drag it here, because then it's not connected to the timer. So we want to drag this into the timer. So before move to happens, we have to have this countdown, which was 1 second. So now, where do we want the actor, the play button actor, to move to? Well, you can see we have an X and Y coordinate here. So if we look back at our cheat sheet, we can see we have 519 by 465 is that center point. So we're going to type in 519 for X and 465 for Y. So now if I press preview, you can see after 1 second, the play button will move to that position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed it up. So instead of 300, let's type in 600. And then preview that. And that's better, moving into place. So we want to do the exact same thing with the options button. So cool little tip here is you can actually click on behaviors and attributes and rules that you create. You can edit, copy them. I'm going to double click on the options actor, and I'm going to edit, paste, and you can see we've now pasted that timer. Now in this case it would have been simple enough to drag in a new timer and get this started from scratch, but if you create a very extensive set of rules and behaviors, sometimes you want to just copy and paste. It's easier than recreating everything over again, and then now I don't have to adjust things like speed, but I do need to adjust the X and Y position. So back to our cheat sheet, we're looking at 512 by 313. So we can type in 512 by 313, but I'm actually not going to change this to 512. I'm going to keep it at 519Y. That way the play and option button are exactly the same. The reason it was 512 and one was 519 is just because when I dropped them in the scene I wasn't perfectly accurate. But the 313, we're definitely going to change that. So 313. And let's preview this. So after 1 second, they both move into position. So take a moment to tweak this. You can tweak your speed and tweak where their starting point is. And I like them moving in perfectly to the side here, but you can pretty much do anything now that you've programmed that. You can put this over here. You can put this guy over here. And if we preview this, they'll just come in from any place like that. So now that they have this rule that says go to these positions after 1 second, you can place them anywhere that you want. But I am going to, unfortunately, now that I've done that and actually previewed, I can't undo that, so be careful. GameSalad's a little bit finicky about its undo. So if I actually want to make sure that they're in the right position now, because for instance, if I play this, You can see the options is coming from a little bit below, and the play button's coming, they're kind of not coming straight across anymore. So to fix this, what we want to do is we want to make sure that they have the appropriate Y position. So 465. So if I double click on the play button, you can see that its position is 0, 0. So we can actually set this Y position to 465. Now if I preview that, it should come in straight across, as it does. And then the options button, its Y was 313. So I'm going to make sure that its starting position is at 313 and preview that as well. And we can get things coming in straight across. So now what we need is when we actually push one of these buttons, it actually does something. So what we'll want to do is click the back arrow, and we're going to want to jump actually back into the play button. So we'll double click on the play actor. And we want to give this a little bit more programming. So we're going to create a new rule by clicking on Create Rule. And what we want to do is switch this first value over to touch. Now don't be confused. Even though you're working on a computer, touch either means click with our cursor on that actor, or if we were programming this for a touch device like the iPad, which we're doing in this case, then obviously it would be if you're touching the screen as well. So in this case, anytime we click on something with our cursor, that's simulating a touch event if you were using an iPad. So we'll switch this over to touch. And what do we want to happen when that play button is touched? Well, we want to change the scene. So again, over here in our behaviors, we have this change scene attribute, which we can click and drag into this rule. And you can see earlier when I was talking about organizing your scenes properly, this is where it comes into play. So when you touch the play actor, go to the next scene. And because we did organize them in the right order, we can leave it set to this. Or you can click on this pull down, you can see you have a list of all the different scenes that you created. In this case, we only have 2, so it's easy enough to switch it over to the game scene. So play button will change the scene over to the game scene. So if we hit preview, we're here in our home screen, and if we go ahead and click on the play button, you can see that automatically takes us into our game. And we can switch back to the home. And the options button is really up to you. I just wanted to create the additional graphic. So in case you wanted to create a third scene, something with options or something with more games, you can use this button for pretty much anything that you want. So now that we've created a way to get from our home screen into our gameplay, let's figure out a way to kind of end our gameplay and then maybe get back to our home screen. So the way that we're going to do this is we'll switch back to our game scene here. And this is the one that we want to work on. And we want to set up some sort of game over, because right now if we preview this, you can see that the ship will essentially explode when it comes in contact with one of these asteroids, but then nothing else happens. We pretty much just sit here for infinity while our screen fills up with an endless amount of asteroids. So we want something to happen when our ship explodes. So let's back up a little bit. And let's bring in a game over graphic. So again, here in our images, I'm going to click this plus icon. And in our art folder, we have a game over PNG that we'll import. So open that up. And we're going to drag that up into our actors area. If I drag that into my scene really quickly, you can see this is what it looks like. Just a game over graphic with a little bit of transparency. So we're going to delete that because we don't want that in our scene. I just wanted to show you what that looked like. What we want is that to essentially show up when our ship explodes. So if we double click on our ship actor, you can see that earlier we created a rule that says this: when the ship overlaps and collides with a rock, which are our asteroids, then we want to destroy the ship and we want to spawn the explosion actor. So pretty simple stuff. Now we don't want to just spawn the explosion actor, but we want to spawn that game over actor that we just brought into our scene here. So what we can do is we can actually click on spawn actor and hold the Alt or Option key and click and drag to duplicate that. So now what happens is when our ship overlaps and collides with a rock, it will become destroyed and it will spawn the explosion actor, and we can actually switch this to spawn the game over actor as well. So let's preview this and see what happens. We'll switch back to our game scene, preview that. And when our ship comes in contact with a rock or an asteroid, we now spawn the game over image. Pretty simple stuff. Now there's a little bit of a problem here. So if I refresh this and I rotate my ship and shoot some of these guys, and then my ship comes in contact, you can see now the game over is set itself up in the orientation of where my ship was rotated, and that's obviously not what we want. So let's back up and let's take a look at a few of the settings here. Double click on the ship, and you can see that this game over actor is being spawned, but we have its direction set to the actor, and we have its position set to the actor. So essentially when it's spawned, it's paying attention to the position and the direction, or the kind of the rotation of where the actor is. We actually want to switch both of these from actor over to scene. So in other words, when this actor is spawned, the game over image, we don't want it to pay attention to the actor. We just want it to pay attention to the scene. So let's see what happens now if we go back into our game scene and then preview this. I'm rotating my ship, but now watch what happens when it explodes. We get that game over graphic, but it has nothing to do with the ship's position and it has nothing to do with the ship's rotation, except for it's showing up at 0, 0, which is not what we want either. So how do we get this to show up in the middle? Well, first we got to figure out where the middle of our scene is, and that can be a little bit confusing at times. But if we again look at our scene attributes up here in the inspector, and we look at our scene size, we can see that our scene is exactly 1024 by 768. So if this is 0, 0 down here, then I move up just a little bit and over a little bit, then that would be 1, 1. If I moved up and over, that'd be 2, 2, and 3, 3, 3, and so on and so forth, up until this corner, where that would be 1024 by 768. So what we need to do is get to that middle point, which would be half of 1024 and half of 768. So you can put something here in the middle and then double click on it and get that, but you wouldn't exactly get the right number. So all you need to do is divide your scene in half to figure out what the center value is. So if you take 1024 and divide that by 2, then you're going to get 512. So if we go back into our ship, we can set up this position to be 512. And if you take 768 and divide that by 2, you're going to get 384. And you can type in 384 for this position. And now if we preview this, let's see what happens. We'll rotate our actor a little bit, try to kill off a few asteroids, and then we get our game over showing up exactly in the center here, which are those coordinates that we put in there. So now we have a great game over, but we're still stuck in the same position where essentially we just have this endless scene going on forever. And what we want is either to set up a button, or in this case, just for it after a certain amount of time to automatically transition back to our home scene. And this is simple enough. We're going to click the back button. And what we want to do is double click on the game over actor. We want to give this some intelligence. So if we go into our behaviors, we can drag in a timer that says after, let's say, 3 seconds, what we want to do is change the scene. So we can change the scene back to the home screen, or we can do something else, which is just reset the whole game. And because our home screen is the very, very first scene, if we click over here, you can see home and then game, resetting will just go back to the very first initial scene. So we'll go back to our game here, double click on the game over actor, and you can see after 3 seconds we'll just reset the whole game. So let's see what happens. Now the game over actor doesn't exist right now, so it's not resetting the whole thing. It only exists when it's spawned, which happens now on impact. So 3, 2, and then 1, and it should reset the whole game. And then we can press play, and then we're back into our scene here. And then 3, 2, 1, and then we're back into the home screen here. And now we have a fully functional game that we can play. Obviously, when we impact all of the asteroids, or are impacted by one of the asteroids, our game is over. So now, with all of that knowledge that you've created or have learned so far, try to think about how you might create a win scenario. I obviously can take you through the same exact steps which we just did for the game over, but I want you to think of a way that you can create a win scenario and actually get back to the home screen. So kind of use the knowledge that you've learned of rules and behaviors and apply that to this game that you've created. So now not only are you going to create a win scenario, but maybe you also have a bright idea for that options button, something that you can do with your space scene here. Another thing that I'd like to challenge you to do at this point is right now you have 2 scenes. We have a game scene and a home. You can definitely create more of these so that you have different levels. So maybe that option button isn't an option button at all, but you might have different levels that you can choose from. So take everything that you've learned here and push yourself to create an even more complex game, but just based on the same rules and behaviors that you've learned so far.